the Kangshan Natural History Museum. Omkar, do you want me to click on yours? Like take control?
Okay. You can. Does it? Is everything working fine?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, it's fine.
okay, I can just do this if you want.
Okay, cool. So this is the museum. So it's like it's pretty close to school. So there's school over here. Then you cross the road. Uh, you know where U-Town is? So you go to U-Town, then you like walk right for a couple, like maybe a kilometer, and then you turn left. So the museum is right there. And it's actually, if you want to go there, right, it's subsidized entrance fee for NUS students. So if you're doing NUS module, right, you get like free entry there. So it's pretty cool. So once you enter, you will find this really epic mural place. On next slide. So you'll find this really cool mural of the different phyla of animals and plants and the number of species in each phylum. So you can see like the pretty cool designs here. And something that's interesting, right, is that you wouldn't expect it, but actually insects are the most diverse phylum that the phylum of animals available. So you can see that there are actually more than a million properly classified, identified species of insects, and we're still yet to be discovering more. And even you see these numbers and you're like, oh my God, there are a lot of animals, right? But actually, we haven't discovered even a small fraction of the biodiversity present on Earth. And believe it or not, a lot of the biodiversity of Earth is actually concentrated within the tropical region. And a good percentage of it is actually found here in Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia is a pretty rich biodiversity zone in the world. So there's like reefs, there's mangroves, there's swamps, there are different types of biomes. So like there are even caves, for instance. And Southeast Asia hosts pays home to like the largest area of mangroves in the world. So it gives a lot of unique habitats for different types of animals to have evolved over the past million years. You can also find like deep sea habitats in the South China Sea. And even in Singapore, you have more than 2,000 native species. But even though most of these are plants, right, they also include 40 plus mammals that are unique to Singapore. So we actually do have a pretty huge biodiversity. So don't discount Singapore there. Okay, next slide, Omkar. So once you go past the entrance area, you go into this area where you see a huge model of Rafflesia. And beside the Rafflesia, there's this place called the Tree of Life. So in this Tree of Life, you'll see the different branches of life. And over here, uh, I can give you a quick introduction. So there are three major domains of life. So at the root of the Tree of Life over there, we start off with the bacterium organism. And from the bacteria, there are we diverge into three major domains. So the first domain is the bacteria. The second domain is the archaea. So archaea, they look pretty similar to the bacteria, but they actually have different cell wall structure, they have different metabolic pathways, etc. And the third, you have the eukarya. So the eukarya is actually the most diverse from the viewpoint that we look at it. Uh, and the eukarya includes fungi, plants, protists, and us and mammals. Okay, so we classify by phylum, class, order, genus, species. So that's pretty simple, and we'll be going through that tree of life in the whole museum here with like amazing specimens. So okay, next, Omkar. So you'll see that once you walk past there, you'll see this really cool model of a rafflesia, and there's going to be a huge plant over there. But it's not a real specimen. So I avoided putting it. Yeah, the plant's over here. So it's a plastic model. So it's not a real specimen. So we won't be putting too much of that here, but it looks really cool in real life. Okay, back one slide, Omkar. So I wanted to give you a quick introduction to the plant diversity. Uh, but we actually did most of that in the previous outing, the evolution garden. So I'll make it really quick. So we have the flowering plants, which is the angiosperms, which is the largest group of plants. And then we have the bryophytes, which form the next largest group. So the bryophytes are like mosses, liverworts, hornworts, really small organisms. So they're at the root of the plant phylogeny, plant evolutionary tree. And then after that, you have the next most diverse group, which is the ferns and the fern allies. So which are the lycophytes and the monilophytes over here. And then you have the gymnosperms. So gymnosperms are seed plants. So the gymnosperms are actually, now they're currently the smallest group, but they were actually pretty diverse back in the age of the dinosaurs, before they were kind of wiped out by the mass extinction. Okay, next, Omkar. So you've done a right, there's a pretty cool moss garden over there, and you can see the different species of mosses over there. Even though it's not really interesting from here, but over there in the museum, right, that at the bottom of each exhibit, there are these small lines and numbers where you can cross check with the exhibit and you can see like what cool species there are there. But we decided to avoid that because there are just too many to cover in this presentation. Okay, so if you take a left from there, there's this row of preserved specimens. So you can see that the preserved specimens are quite cool because you can preserve them for a long time and you can keep them in the museum for ages. So how do you do that? If you want to preserve your own specimen, you can actually do it at home. So you take a plant specimen, okay, and you have to press it together in the middle of a newspaper. And once you do that, you arrange it inside cardboard sheets and you bundle it up together and you put a book on it. So it's pressed into a thin sheet. And then after you have to heat dry it and then you keep it in the freezer. So once you do that, right, you get this really cool preserved plant specimen. It's really dry, so it stays fresh for a long time, and you can keep it for a very long time. It makes for a very nice artwork, and you can preserve flowers in that too. Yeah, so you can see a lot of preserved plants in the museum also. Okay, next. So once you go past the plants, you have a small section on the fungi. So in the fungi, right? I'm going to go to the next slide first.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the fungi, you can see a lot of cool specimens here. So the fungi include like mushrooms. You can even have like edible mushrooms like truffles, and they're also very useful to us. So for example, like yeasts and mold and other microbes, which may not be so useful to us. It's actually really, fungi is, we may not treat fungi as really diverse, but it is quite diverse. But it's least studied kingdom of life because we don't really give fungi all that much credit. But fungi are actually pretty important. So you have like penicillin, for example. If penicillium, which gave rise to penicillin, which is one of the most widely used antibiotics. You also have yeast, without which you won't have bread and beer. And also you have plants. Fungi are useful to plants too. So for example, they can form symbiotic relations with plants. So mycorrhizal fungi will help to absorb nutrients from the soil and put it into plants. And fungal enzymes are also used in industrial processes. So if you go, you can see this tree over here. So which shows quite briefly the diversity of fungi. So at the top, you have the chytrids. So chytrids are fungi that infect a lot of frogs and contributes to the mass extinction of frogs that we're currently seeing. You have zygomycota, which are small fungus, and glomeromycota, which are also small fungus. So those are not very well studied. But the ascomycota and basidiomycota are quite well studied. So the basidiomycota is all our mushrooms, including our edible mushrooms and truffles. The ascomycota are sac fungi. So if you look around in the Thompson Nature Park, right, you will sometimes see fungi that will go on a stalk and there will be a sac. So instead of a usual mushroom shape like this, you will see a lot of like cavities in there. So this forms the ascomycota and the spores will be inside the cavities. Whereas the basidiomycota, you will form an umbrella and then you'll see like the spores underneath it. Okay, Omkar, next slide. So from like before that. So over here, you can see some like recognizable fungi, even though you may not be able to recognize most. The ones at the right-hand side, in the bottom right-hand side, are bracket fungi. So you can see bracket fungus on growing on trees. So the way you recognize them is because bracket fungi are, they'll be planar, they're flat, and they'll attach to the tree on one of the sides. You can also quite rarely see them grown in the ground, actually. So me and Chongyan were walking outside school, and there was a whole bundle of bracket fungus growing on the ground there. So I took one home to microscope it. So it's pretty cool. You can also see some mushrooms here, but not all of them are edible. Some of them are really quite poisonous. And all of these specimens are collected from Singapore. So in like Bukit Timah or Macritchie. So like the scientists study them because some mushrooms can actually have cool applications. So some of them can be medicines. Yeah. Okay. So once you go past the fungus, then you go to like the real amazing part of the museum, which are all the animal specimens that are found there. So we start off pretty simple. We start off with the invertebrates. So this is a brief overview of the tree of life of animals. And you will find some really unexpected things here. So for example, you'll find out that animals actually started, they didn't start moving. They started not moving. So they started down at the deep end of the sea. So these are actually the sponges, phylum Porifera. So the sponges are down at the deep end of the sea, and they started off as filter feeders. So they collect the small algae and plankton that are floating around the ocean, and you eat them. Then from there evolved the Cnidaria. So the Cnidaria are like jellyfish, so they're very, very simple animals. So from here, there's a very important divergence point. So there's protostomes, which is on the right-hand side, and this deuterostomes, which is on the left-hand side. So I won't be covering in detail the various organisms. That's what Omkar and Shongya will be doing. But I'll give you a brief distinction between the two groups. So at the base, at the start of embryonic development, there'll be a ball of cells. And the ball of cells, to start growing from the ball of cells to a body, the ball of cells will kind of infold. So that hole from the infold can either become a mouth or it can become the anus. So you can think of the body as a kind of a donut. Okay, so at the one end of the donut, there's the mouth, and the other end of the donut, there's the anus. So in uterostomes, the first hole becomes the anus. So we are kind of all assholes. But the other end of the tree of animals, the first hole becomes the mouth. So the mouth formers are called protostomes. The ass formers are called deuterostomes. So we are part of the ass formers. So we are most closely related to starfishes, and almost all the rest of the animals are actually protostomes. Okay. So once you go a bit inside the museum, you can see like various different animals that are preserved, and they're kept in these kind of glass bottles. So you can see a diverse range of animals here. So, but I'll be covering just a few. So I'll be covering the Cnidaria, which are the jellyfishes, and the sponges. So you can see over here. Okay, next one. So you can see over here that a few of these glass bottles, and on the left, there are some samples of Cnidaria. So on the top leftmost picture, right, there's a hydroid. So the hydroid is actually, if you've heard of it, a hydroid is a polyp. So the polyp is like, it's on the ocean floor. It will stay there, and it will kind of electrocute animals and bring them to its mouth and eat it. So it's anchored to the ocean floor, the ocean wall. So this is just one stage of the jellyfish's life cycle. So first it'll start off as a polyp, and from the polyp you will form the medusa life stage. So the medusa life stage is the free-floating jellyfish that we actually see in the ocean. You may not know this, but corals are actually quite related to the jellyfish. So they are part of the Cnidaria, and the corals are different from the usual jellyfish in that they don't have a free-floating medusa life cycle stage. Instead, they just spend the whole life cycle as polyps, and they secrete hard, like calcium carbonate shells, which make sure that they are like quite rigid and quite hard and don't move around that easily and don't break off. So those are corals. And on the right-hand side, there's some samples of annelids. So annelids are in the earthworm family. And you'll find that actually many deep sea annelids are pretty large and pretty big. So you can see here that the giant reef-worm is like pretty huge. So it's about this long and usually floats at the bottom of the sea. And you can have some that are like up to 1 meter or 2 meters long, but obviously they can't store that in the museum. So you have some other samples here. Yeah, again, next. So these were the sponges I was talking about earlier. So the sponges, a good sample actually is at the bottom left corner. So you imagine the bottom of that sticking into the soil. And from there you have this white long sac that sticks out into the ocean. And whenever something floats by, it'll float into the tube and it'll come out of the top of the tube. And while in that motion, the sponge will capture some of the microorganisms so it can eat it. Yeah. Okay, so from here, we will move on to the various animals. So the mollusks and the arthropods, which Shongyan will be covering.
Okay, so now I'll be presenting about the mollusks. And okay, Omka, next slide. So basically, the mollusk is actually located in a very sort of far part away from the entrance of the museum. Then Omka, next slide. Yeah, then okay, so now we'll talk about the adaptation of the mollusks that she used. So actually you can see here like the first most, like I think the most interesting thing that catches the eye is the spines that's present on the mollusk. So these spines are actually used for like protection against predators for the mollusk. And then next also see that there's also comes some kind of shells which are busy for burrowing, because for molars, this is a specific type of molar. This is called the bivalves, but we'll dive into greater detail for that. So for the bivalves, they usually they use shells. It's actually used to burrow themselves in the sand so they can avoid predation, because they won't be spotted by predators. So you also can see like at the other right side of the part, we can see that there's actually some shells that actually look quite different from the shells for burrowing, which is actually like more like a very flat kind. So this is actually for like the scallops. So the interesting part about the scallops, right, is that the scallop shell is actually very flat, and I think they are the only bivalves which can actually like sort of like swim in the water, because they're like their shells are so powerful. They can just like open and close and then push water, and they just like yeet away from the predators. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so actually for molars, there's actually three classes for the molars. We can see that there's the bivalves here, and we can see that there's cephalopods, and there's actually one more, which is the gastropoda, but that one's for the other slide. Okay, I'll talk about the bivalves first. So the reason why it's called bivalves, right, is because bi means two, and valves usually refers to the valves which your shell. So that's why you have two shells that then it's bilaterally symmetrical. And then also we have a cephalopoda. Cephalopoda is actually a very interesting form of like molars, because for your cephalopoda, you notice that they don't have a distinct shell. So the shell is actually found in the interior of the body. So you usually think that, oh, for molars, you would have the shell, which is for protection, but instead for the cephalopoda, the shell is actually very reduced, and instead you have a very muscular body. So the muscular body is a very like specialized form of adaptation, which is usually used for used for a very special type of body movement, which is called jet propulsion, which actually allows them to quickly move away from predators. And when you have a very muscular body to move quickly away from predators, you do not need the shell for protection anymore, and that is why it is reduced. Next slide. And okay, here you can see there's the gastropoda. So the gastropoda actually, you see for most of them, you notice that their shells actually spiral lah. So the spiral actually help to like reduce the body size, and also help to concentrate it, so they can like control where the center of gravity is for stability. And actually it's actually not very obvious here, but actually for gastropoda, for gastropoda, the way they feed, they actually have an organ called the radula, which is sort of protrusible organ. It's something like our tongue. So what they do is that they stick it out, and they use it to rest against surfaces, or like scrape it against surfaces, so they can remove food particles, and then they will suck it in for their consumption. So why am I talking about the radula? Because the radula is actually quite interesting. So because there's something called, if you see in the I think it's at the bottom middle there, you can see there's something called like, there's these shells there. So it's actually called these cone snails. So the cone snails is a very interesting it's very interesting because it has here a specialized form of the radula, which is actually converted into sort of like it's actually converted into sort of a like what do you call it, a shooting thing, like like a hook, yeah. So the hook actually is actually contains a very strong toxin. So what the cone snail does is it actually shoots a hook at its prey, and the moment the hook lands in the prey becomes immobilizes and dies within like seconds or minutes. And the toxin is strong enough that it's even deadly to us. So yeah, the cone snail is quite interesting. Next slide. Now we'll be moving on to the arthropods. Next slide. So for the arthropods, there's a few key features that we want to talk about. So for arthropods, there's actually something called tegmatization. So what exactly is tegmatization? Tegmatization actually refers to the separation of your body into different segments. So by separating into different segments, it actually can be done in two types. So for example, let's say you can separate your body into many different identical segments. So what I mean by identical segments, like maybe your millipedes, your centipedes. So you notice they have many small body parts, and they are repeated several times, and they also have many legs. So all these segments actually perform like the same function. So which technically means that if you take off one of them, the millipede and centipede will be able to survive. And also there's also the separation of the body parts into different segments, which of which is specialized to perform different functions. So this can be seen in most of the other arthropods, which is like your horseshoe crab, your crabs, maybe your and then other ones. Also, there's something a distinct feature for your arthropods is also your jointed appendages. So the jointed appendages basically means that between the appendages, there is actually a joint in between the appendages. So the purpose of the joint is actually to allow for greater flexibility and greater movement. So obviously, if you have greater movement, it'll be a very strong survival advantage since you will move much more quickly away from predators as compared to other organisms. And also for arthropods, another distinct feature is your exoskeleton. And your exoskeleton, which means so because the exoskeleton is actually hard and rigid, so it means that you are unable to grow unless you shed this exoskeleton, like depending on your time period, maybe like every few months, every few years, and thus you have something called ecdysis, which is the shedding, which is the molting essentially. Next slide. Okay, so now we'll move on to the chelicerate. So the chelicerate refers to your organisms like your spiders, your scorpions, and your mites. So you see that you have your so chelicerate also includes your horseshoe crab actually. So your horseshoe crab is one of the oldest organisms that's living on this earth. And then chelicerates, you have separated in the case of your talking about tegmatization, it's separated into your two segments, which is called your cephalothorax, which is the main section, which is your head and most of the body, and then you have abdomen, which is at the back. And then you also chelicerates actually has 6 pairs of appendages. So your first pair of appendage is actually called a chelicerate, and your second pair of appendage is called the pedipalps. And you actually have 4 more pairs of walking legs. And the chelicerates also do not have an antenna. Yes. And next one, talking about the crustaceans. So crustaceans, you actually have different kinds. So crustaceans, usually we will think about, when you think about crustaceans, talk about crabs, and your crabs, lobsters, maybe your shrimps. But actually, your crustaceans also includes like your other marine organisms like your barnacles as well. And also crustaceans increasing so interestingly we also crustaceans is also called decapods. So why is it called decapods? So for some of them they are called decapods. So deca refers to 10 and your pods refers to your legs. So this means that your crabs or your true crabs has 10 legs. So we can compare this 10 legs feature to your horseshoe crab. Because remember, horseshoe crab is from your chelicerate and it has 6 pairs of legs. However, for your true crabs, your decapods, it only has 10 legs. Next line. Then here with your barnacles and you have your isopods and your prawns. And your prawns I believe your isopods do not have 10 legs. And then afterwards you have your lobsters as well for your crustaceans. And this is a very, very huge crab that we found on our way, which we had to use a very wide angle picture of because it's just that huge. Okay, next. Now we'll talk about the insects. And then for the insects, next slide. We have your Hemiptera. So we are talking about the also tegmatization also applies for your crab for your insects. Your insects also called your hexapods. Relates back to your decapods for your crabs. Hexa means 6, and then your pods means your legs again. So all true insects have 6 legs. And if your true bugs, aphids and cicadas, then sucking mouth parts, and then most of them have sting glands. Yeah, and then these are your bugs. Next slide. So now you have your Blattodea. I think this Blattodea is the most interesting because if you actually there's also a specific class called Blatteria. Blatteria means your cockroaches. So it's a very fun fact to tell. I know what Blatteria are. Blatteria are cockroaches. Yes. And then you also have cockroaches, and you see that termites is actually also related. It's also under Blattodea with cockroaches. Which is quite interesting because you thought that ants and termites look so similar and you think that they are more closely related to each other. But apparently termites are more closely related to cockroaches than to ants. Yes, and then you also talk about your Mentodea. So Mentodea, your M so refers to your praying mantis. So praying mantis is a very distinct features like your large front legs and your spikes used to catch your prey, and then you also have your chewing mouth parts. Next slide. Then you also have your Coleoptera. Coleoptera refers to your beetles. So your beetles actually have your front wings which are hardened, which is called your elytra. Then you have your membranous underwings, and you also have your chewing mouth parts. So there's also a lot of different beetles. Next slide. Then next you have your Hymenoptera. Hymenoptera refers to your bees, your wasps, and your ants. So yeah, the ants is not related to your termites at all, surprisingly. Then if your bees, and then you have your large membranous wings. And also you have your wasp waist. So your wasp waist is quite distinct because it means that it has a very small waist as compared to the rest of the body parts. So it can help help to identify between like your bees and your wasp, because your bees is like your large body, but then your wasp has a very thin waist. So if you see a wasp, you know it's a wasp and it's time to run away. And then you also have your tongue and mouth part, which is used for drinking liquid. And next slide. So lastly, if your Lepidoptera, Lepidoptera refers to your butterflies and your moths, which is very distinct, and it's very of course very easy to tell between your butterflies and moths, because they're all very large and beautiful wings. So you see your wings for your scales, and then you have your proboscis, which is basically a very long and thin mouth part used to suck nectar from the flowers for your feeding. And so all of them have complete metamorphosis. Complete metamorphosis refers to your metamorphosis that their young and adult looks very different from each other. And also talking about butterflies and moths, there's actually is the way to identify between a butterfly and a moth is that you see the butterfly and moth when they land. If the butterfly when they land, the wings are upwards, which it means that it's a butterfly. But if the wings are downwards and they are like laying flat along the surface, it means that it's actually a moth. Yes, and it is also a way to tell by the texture of the feelers, but I don't think you're able to see the feelers when you're looking at a butterfly or moth. So yes. Next one. And now is on the echinoderms, which Chung will present. Okay, so hi guys. Now I shall be presenting to you the next phylum, which is phylum the echinoderms. Okay, so next slide, please. So the echinoderms are actually made up of 5 main classes. So I introduce you the classes first. So there's like the starfishes, the brittle stars, sea lilies, sea cucumbers, and echinoids. So they're actually mostly found in the marine environment. And so basically for this phylum, the main defining feature, Omka, please move to the previous slide. Yes, the main defining feature of all the animals in this phylum is that they have what is known as a pentaradial symmetry. So let's take a look at, like, for example, the starfish and the brittle star. You can see it's very obvious there are 5 protruding segments, right? That's why it's penta, and radial because they are like in a circle around, right? So this pentaradial symmetry, it actually applies to the other 3 classes also, the sea lily, sea cucumbers, and echinoids. It's just that they are not very obvious, but they actually do apply to all of them as well. And for this phylum, actually many of them also have what is known as ossicles. So what these ossicles are, they're basically like a shell. They actually form like a shell, which is actually made of calcium carbonate. That's why, for example, if you remember you touch a starfish, it actually is very hard because they actually have a shell that is made of calcium carbonate, a calcareous shell that allows them to it's actually for like protection now. Yeah, so let's move on to the next slide. So for the echinoderms, there wasn't much that was explained in the museum, but here I just want to show you like that for the echinoderms, there's also quite a large diversity in this phylum also. So next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the closer look up at the left side of the picture previously. And for example, we can see at the top here, so these are actually like the echinoids. These are the echinoids. So at the top, we have, for example, this flattened, we can see like this flattened disc, like these organisms have a flattened disc-like structure. And yeah, and these are actually known as sand dollars. Or at the bottom, we can see, like, for example, they have a globular structure, like a circle, and they have many spines. So these are actually your sea urchins. And these sea urchins are very important in your marine environment. Yeah, so next slide, please. Yeah, so no, back. Okay. Yes, so here we can also see, for example, the brittle stars and your sea stars. Yeah, so this class is actually quite diverse. Next slide, please. Yeah, so now we shall move on to chordates. And the phylum Chordata is actually made up of many organisms, and they have a wide diversity. So move on to the next slide. So, okay, so here I want to ask you guys a question. So on the left, we have a hagfish, and on the right, we have onca. So what do they have? What do they possibly have in common other than an ugly face? Would anyone like to answer? Okay. Scorman, would you like to answer?
Hi.
Would you like to take a guess?
What else do they have in common?
Yes.
Mm,
Omkar's dying.
Okay, just take a guess. It can be any facial features also.
it's a bit painful to look at.
Yes, of course, that is a very defining feature. Okay, so back to the real thing. Move to the next slide, please. So for this phylum chordates, so this phylum of chordates, all of them actually have 4 defining features. So I'd like to present to you the, even though okay, the is quite a bad color scheme, but okay, so I want you to take a look. So they have 4 defining features. First, they have a notochord, they have a dorsal hollow nerve cord, they have a post-anal tail, as well as pharyngeal slits. So first, let's take a look at the notochord. So what the notochord is actually like a cartilaginous, it's like a cartilaginous rod-like structure. So for the notochord, it actually, what it does is that it provides like a substrate that muscles can act on. So I want you to think of this, it's like a rod that you can pull and push against. So what this allows for is that it allows for motion in the animals. Okay, so right above it on the dorsal side, you also have a hollow nerve cord. And yeah, as the name implies, this nerve cord allows it to transmit signals through the body. Yeah, there's also a post-anal tail, which is quite self-explanatory. And also there is pharyngeal slits. So pharyngeal slits allow for respiratory exchange in some animals. But for the phylum chordates, one important thing to note is that many of these features are present in the embryo stage. And this is what defines this phylum. However, when for many of the animals in this phylum, when they grow up into an adult stage, many of these features actually become very reduced or less prominent. So I want you to think of, like, for example, in humans. So in an adult human, or for example in you, where do you think the notochord goes? So the notochord is actually, what happens is that in adult humans, it actually gets reduced into a spongy-like tissue that is between the bones of your vertebral disc. So for example, your spine is actually made up of many columns of hard bones, but basically the notochord is just the tissue that occupies the space between these bones. Yeah, so and also for the pharyngeal slits in humans, it actually gets reduced into just structures in your head. So for example, your ear. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So for chordates, the first group that actually evolved from this was actually the fishes. And now let's take a look at the fishes. So fish. So the first class of fish that I want you to take a look at is the actinopterygii. And what these are actually ray fin fishes. So what are ray fin fishes? So it's very self-explanatory. A ray fin fish is basically, they have fins that have ray-like structure. So their bones are like very long and very thin, a bit like, you can imagine it a bit like a hand, very long and thin. And yeah, so for this class of fishes, there actually is quite diverse, and there are actually many adaptations of some of the fishes here. So for example, I want to take a look at the leftmost picture. So for the leftmost picture, we have at the top we have mud skippers. Yeah, and these mud skippers have adaptations of being able to breathe out of water. So for example, to escape predators. At the bottom, we have some of these fishes are actually top predators. So here we can see, for example, a lionfish in the middle, and we have a shark, a juvenile shark on the left. Yeah. So for the middle picture, some of them actually can undergo transformations. So what do I mean by this? For example, the clownfish. Clownfish is actually able to change sex. Wow. And yeah, so the porcupine fish on the bottom, it actually has spines for protection. And on the rightmost picture, some of these fishes also have are also venomous and very poisonous. So one very common example would be like the eel catfish that can be seen on the bottom panel. Yeah. So for one interesting thing about the this class of fishes also is that for the early fishes that actually that were actually present in this group, they actually had lungs. But for many of them, they actually, what happens is this lung actually evolved into another structure, which is of very great use in this class of fishes. So what they actually became was what is known as the swim bladder. And this swim bladder, instead of allowing for gaseous exchange like in the lungs, what the air bladder does is that it allows the fish to actually change its density, so it's able to float and sink very easily. Yeah. So next slide, please. Now we have the second class of fishes, which is known as the scar-caught perigee. So these are actually lobe fin fishes. So what is lobe fin fish? Essentially, unlike ray fin fish as presented before, now the bones in their fins are like more rounded, and they are less like thin and long like the ray fin fishes. So a bit like when you close your palm, yeah, something like that. But many of these are round like bone structure. Yeah. So two main groups from this class of fishes would be the coelacanths and the lungfishes. So lungfishes, as the name suggests, it actually has lungs which can allow for gaseous exchange. And for the coelacanths are actually quite interesting because they were actually a group that was predicted by scientists to exist, but they were thought to have been extinct very, very long ago, like 65 million years ago. But only recently in 2008, they've actually found living species of living fossils or living species of these in the waters near Indonesia. So they were actually reclassified to become an extinct species. That means they are still actually alive. And however, unfortunately, they're actually very elusive and they only live like in very deep waters. That's why we don't usually see them. Yeah. So next slide, please. Yeah. So after the fishes, we actually backtrack a little. Okay, so essentially after the fishes developed, so essentially from the fish to become the other chordates, as mentioned earlier, there was a transition from aquatic life to terrestrial life. So the rest of the animals in the chordates group are actually mostly living a terrestrial. They have a terrestrial lifestyle. And let's take a look at how this transition occurred. So from water to land, we have to first take a look at some of the challenges that were faced by the animals when they transition from aquatic environment to a terrestrial environment. So first, very obvious is that the terrestrial environment is much drier than the aquatic environment. So what this means is that the animals actually face a very huge risk of having desiccation or dehydration. So obviously, if you don't have water, it's very bad for you. And hence, many of them develop special adaptations for it. For example, they develop a waterproof layer like skins or scales so that they can reduce water loss to the environment. Also, reproduction poses a challenge because the aquatic medium is much easier for dispersion of, like, for example, eggs and sperms. However, for the dry environment, terrestrial environment, it's very hard for this to occur. Yeah, and also the eggs may face a problem of desiccation. So hence they develop what is known as internal fertilization, which greatly increases your chances for reproductive success. Lastly, for gaseous exchange surface, all gaseous exchange surface actually require a moist surface. However, as mentioned earlier, because it's a dry environment, it is very hard to maintain this, and hence the animals must come up with solutions for this to maintain a thin film of moisture over their respiratory surface. So the second challenge that they face is that air is much less dense than water. So what this actually means is that the air is less able to provide a buoyant force, which means that it's less able to support the weight of the animals, unlike water. So what this means is that the animals must develop stronger and harder skeletons and muscles so that they are able to support their own body weight. And also for this reason, this is why in many aquatic animals are much larger than the terrestrial animals. Yeah, and the last problem that they face is that air has a much lower heat capacity. So what this means is that the temperature in the air fluctuates a lot more. It goes up and down a lot faster than it would in water. So because of this, the animals, in order to maintain a constant body, not constant body temperature, but in order to maintain an optimal body temperature, they must be able to, for example, some of them develop endothermy. So what this means is that it can regulate its own temperature to maintain within a suitable range for them. Yeah, so next. So now I would like to introduce to you a very interesting concept in biology known as a transitional fossil. So what is a transitional fossil? Transitional species. So essentially from transition to an aquatic to a land animal, there must have been an animal in the middle of this evolution or transition. And essentially this transition animal must have features of both the previous and the now characteristics. So this is what is defined as a transitional species. And essentially, if you can find a transitional species it confirms the happening of this evolution. So one transitional species that scientists actually found was known as a tiktaalik. So this tiktaalik actually had characteristics of aquatic and terrestrial organisms. Hence, it is able to definitively show that the evolution from aquatic living to terrestrial living happened. So there are some aquatic characteristics of the tiktaalik. For example, they have gills and they have fins. But however, they also have characteristics of a terrestrial animal. So for example, it has eyes on its head. So what the eyes on its head allow for is that it allows for it to peek out of the water and it can like look at the organisms on the land so that it, for example, it can avoid predators or hunt for prey. Yeah. And also it has lungs. The tiktaalik has lungs, which is quite rare in aquatic organisms. It has a strong rib cage, which allows for the protection of the lungs, and as well as having a movable neck. Yeah. So essentially, the tiktaalik was a transition from the fish to the other chordates. So what are the other chordates? Now we'll move on to one of the first chordates, which are actually the amphibians. Yeah. So next slide, please. Yeah. So these are the amphibians. Very cute, right? Okay. So what are defined as amphibians? So amphibians are defined by having a double life. So what's a double life? Essentially, the young tend to be aquatic dwelling, which means they live in the waters, while as adults, they will live on land. However, do note that for amphibians, essentially, they are the group that are least adapted to terrestrial lifestyle. What this means is that they actually, as adults, even though they can live on land, usually they will actually live near the waters because they have to keep they have to stay in a moist environment so that they do not die essentially. Yeah. And they are ectothermic, which means they rely on external heat source rather than heat produce their own body. So to keep their to regulate their body temperature. Also, they undergo complete metamorphosis. So as mentioned by Chongyuan earlier, what complete metamorphosis is that the young and the adults, they actually have very different morphologies. It's a very drastic difference. So some of the animals here in this group include the frogs, newts, and salamanders. So to explain complete metamorphosis better, I want you to think of a frog. So what's the young of a frog? So obviously it's a tadpole, right? And tadpole is very, very different from how a frog looks like, right? So what is one of the important functions of complete metamorphosis is that it ensures that the young and the adults, they actually exploit very different resources. So for example, the frogs will feed on very different food from what the adult frogs feed on. And what this allows for is that it prevents competition for resources or food between the young and the adults. Yeah, so obviously, reducing competition within the young and the adults is much better so that it allows for higher chance of survival. Yeah. So for these amphibians, yeah, you can see here, these are the frogs. In this museum, there were actually many they showcase many different species of frogs and the newts and salamanders. Yeah, and yeah, so these are just the amphibians. Yeah. And now we will move on to reptiles, which I'll allow Omkar to take the stage. Yes.
Okay. Hi guys, so now we'll move on to reptiles and some of the larger chordates. Okay, so when it comes to reptiles, what exactly is the difference between a reptile and an amphibian? So there's a difference in the sense that amphibians are one of the first groups that emerged after animals moved from the water to land, but they still relied heavily on the water. For example, let's say with respiration. We can breathe in, we have lungs, we manage to take in air, but amphibians can't do that. So they have a thin film of moisture and they need to constantly remain in damp or moist conditions because oxygen needs to dissolve in that. So they can't be completely separated from water yet. But reptiles evolved many, many features which allowed them to actually effectively live on land and just drink water. So the first thing is they have strong intercostal muscles. So they have lungs just like us. So the lungs are just sacs which can take in air. So the intercostal muscles need to be able to compress and allow it to expand, which means you can push air out and take air back in due to pressure difference. So this was one of the key features that allowed us to evolve lungs and allowed reptiles in the first place to evolve lungs. So the second thing is scaly skin. So remember, amphibians and all animals under amphibians have moist skin because they need oxygen to dissolve. But because reptiles have lungs, they don't need this. So they actually have scales. So they have cells that are specifically keratinocytes, which their sole purpose is to dye and produce keratin, which actually protects reptiles, which is why if you see snakes, they have scales. Crocodiles have very hard scales. So they actually are adapted to terrestrial life and they can protect themselves. Secondly, on top of the scales is an oily layer of sebum. So what that does is it prevents any kind of water from evaporating easily. So because they don't live in water and they just take in water, the oily layer is useful because it means that they can keep it for a long time and it doesn't evaporate very fast. And the last thing is all of the other animals, fish, amphibians, and all the animals we learned previously, they operate on external fertilization, which means they can lay eggs, which have just a very thin jelly coat, and they lay it in a corner in the water. And the water can carry the sperm to the eggs. The water can keep the eggs safe. But on land, we can't have that because the eggs need some kind of structure. The jelly would collapse because of gravity, and sperm would have no way of getting there. So reptiles actually evolved internal fertilization, where all the fertilization occurs internally, and then a shell is formed around the eggs, and shelled eggs are laid. So these are some of the different species that we actually saw in the museum. So you can see there's a very, very wide number of, you have snakes, you have lizards, you have actually, so there are many groups. There's tuataras, there's lizards, snakes, crocodiles, and later on you have birds and turtles as well. So birds we will cover separately, but everything else has the classic features that you would expect a reptile to have. So turtles took it one step further. So they evolved shells itself. So most reptiles though just have scales. Yes, these are turtles. So some of them can actually grow really big. This is a giant crocodile, which we totally did not touch because you're not allowed to. But yes, it's very cool. So a lot of these, some of these specimens, right, it's important to note that they are actually real specimens. So they've been preserved, but they are not models, which means that you can actually, if you inspect it closely, you can really clearly see the different scales and the different layers of the scales. So if you guys ever go to the museum, do check that out. It's quite cool. And these are snakes. So some of them are actually really big, but they are preserved very well. Yes. Okay, next we will go to dinosaurs. Now, dinosaurs are actually a huge, huge, huge group of animals, and they used to roam the earth about, I think they were extinct around 90 million years ago. But for a good 70 million years or so, they were the dominant species. So now let me ask you one thing before I go to the next slide. Dinosaurs were huge back then, but do you guys know exactly how big they are? So if anyone would like to unmute, can you tell me the heaviest dinosaur, about how much do you think it weighed?
I volunteer Sriniket.
Okay, Sriniket, how much do you think the heaviest dinosaur is?
77 tons.
77 tons. Okay, that's 77,000 kilograms. Okay, I'll ask one more person. I don't know, Vanity?
90,000.
90,000. Good guess. So actually, Vanity, your guess was the higher one. Well, the answer is double yours. So the heaviest dinosaur was 180,000 kilograms. That is equal to 3,000 Chongyuans, all of them combined. So it's really, really, really cool because earlier we saw that huge animals can exist in water because there's buoyancy, you practically float, you don't need much strength. But the blue whale is about 200,000 kilos, 200 tons. So a 180-ton animal on land is insanely heavy. So let's look at this group. It's the sauropods. So in the bottom left, you can see a human. And then you look at the dinosaur, Argentinosaurus. It's one of the biggest dinosaurs that has ever been found. And this is the size. Now, how did they eat? Well, they ate all of low-lying vegetation. Because they were so big, their neck was so big, they actually couldn't reach up to the trees. Their heart wasn't powerful enough to pump blood up. They would just faint. So they actually had to eat low-lying vegetation. And how did they fight? Well, they were huge. So I'll give you an example. One of these dinosaurs, Argentinosaurus, it was so heavy when it stood, its footprint created quicksand. Now I'll ask another question. Anyone, would you like to venture a guess? How many animals were found in that quicksand? Anybody? Okay, Trivi, Aishu, any of you, come on. It's a simple guess.
5?
Anyone? 5, cool. Any other?
12.
12. Yeah, the answer is 18. And these weren't small animals, by the way, crocodiles, turtles, huge, big animals, nearly a meter long, were found buried in the quicksand just with one footprint. So this was the size of dinosaurs back then, sauropods. Their tail could completely break your back if it just hit you. So this is the magnitude of animals back then, and dinosaurs are really cool. So yes, this is sauropods. They're the biggest group and they just ate all day. In fact, they swallowed giant stones to help their stomach digest because they ate like trees, number of trees a day, not any scale smaller than that. Okay, the next group is theropods. So theropods are characteristic. They are the most famous meat eaters. So they are mostly predators and they are three-toed limbs. So they're three-toed limbs with big claws and powerful legs, allowed them to run quite fast, chase after prey. And some had great speed, sight, hearing, and smell. For example, T-Rex had very good hearing and smell actually, which is how it hunted its prey. There's a few other groups such as ornithopods, which are closely related to birds. They look like, so some of them are, okay. Ornithopods have relations to birds. So the one on the left is Parasaurolophus. You see the huge thing on its head? Actually, that was used to pump air in, which means it made a huge groaning, bellowing sound. And that was the function of that. And you have ceratopsians on the right, which, well, headbutt. That was their mode of defense. You have stegosaurs, where stegosaurs, the plates actually were for helping it heat up and cool down because they had blood flowing through. So it could easily heat up if need be. And they had, you see the spikes on the left, the small spikes at the end of the tail? Yeah, those were each about 1 meter long. They are called thagomizers. And if it stabs you, it could easily kill you. So they used to wave the spikes around really fast. And that used to be their mechanism of defense. The last group is ankylosaurids. They were literally tanks. So the one on the right is Euplocephalus, and it's basically a dinosaur with spikes all over and a huge club to bash anything that attacks it. So these were some of the fossils we actually saw, real fossils, I think. I'm not too sure if all of them are real, but some of them were real fossils excavated. So these were some of the smaller sauropods actually found in the museum. And there's some person's head in there just to give you an idea of the scale. Yes, so these are a few others. So this was the second floor, and you can see the height of the dinosaur. Now, generally the neck is theorized that it did not go up this high, but this is the size. And you know, the bone you find on the right, that was an Edmontosaurus femur. So it's a femur. So the femur is found in our thigh. So that was the thigh bone of one of the dinosaurs. And this was a 3-ton dinosaur. So imagine a 180-ton dinosaur. The bones were bigger than us. It's about 1.5 times our height, or a little less. And that's just the thigh bone. But okay, now we will move on to birds. So now let's look at birds. Birds are cute. They're tiny and they're cute, but they actually are theorized to have come from dinosaurs, which are not that tiny and not that cute. So, okay, let's see. So how did they come about? So dinosaurs actually do have a lot of similarities. So one of the best preserved fossils was Archaeopteryx. So Archaeopteryx was a dinosaur. Just to clarify, none of the dinosaurs could fly, but some of them could glide. So they used to glide in U-shaped motions, which means they jump off a tree, they'd go down and they'd glide back up and go to the next tree. And then they would keep on gliding like this. So Archaeopteryx had reptilian and bird-like features in the sense that its bones were a lot less dense, allowing it to fly better. It had a lot of feathers and it had a beak-like structure. You can even see something like a furcula in the Archaeopteryx skeleton, and I'll come to what a furcula is soon. So this is one of the species, or one of the best preserved fossils that provided very strong evidence that birds actually may come from dinosaurs. So now, if you look at birds, okay, so the first thing to see is birds have something called pneumatized bones. So what does this mean? A common misconception is that birds have very, very light bones. That's not true. Their bones are actually of similar weight to ours in terms, if you look at the relative size. But why are they called, why is they supposed to be so hollow yet still so strong? So the thing is, we have general bones. Our bones don't have as high a density, but most of it is covered with, most of the inside of our bone is bony material. Birds don't have this. So they have a lot of air spaces, which allow it to remain hollow. But they do have something called struts or pneumatized struts. So each of the bones you see in the bird, right, is extra dense and extra reinforced, which allows it to actually withstand a lot of twisting and torsion that they would face in the air, because this structure would keep it very strong. But the whole bird can't be fully this dense. So to counteract that, you have a lot of hollow air spaces. The second thing, if you can see in the bottom left, is something called a furcula, a wishbone. It's like Y-shaped, and it has elastic bands as well, which allows it to, it's elastic. So when the bird flaps its wings, right, the furcula will help pull the wing back up. So if you imagine, just take a minute and try flapping your wings, guys, your hands, sorry, and just try. It's very tiring. So you don't want to have to flap it down and pull it back up. So the furcula helps with that. You flap it down, it will automatically pull it back. So half of the effort is, well, pretty much, well, you don't have to put in all of the effort. It's just brought back. The second thing is a keel. So a keel was the chest. If you ever looked at a bird, it looks like it's flexing. It's always got its chest out. It's got a huge chest. The reason is a keel. So the keel's job is to provide a huge anchor for birds' muscles. Imagine flapping your wings all day. You must need a huge amount of energy for that, and you need huge muscles. So the keel provides a anchoring location for huge muscles, pectoralis muscles, and they allow the birds to actually fly. Yes. The last thing is primary and secondary feathers. So I won't go into detail about how they work, but they have differentiated functions. So one of them functions very well in keeping the bird streamlined, and it allows it to look at, turn and maintain direction. And the other one helps it generate a lot of lift. Okay, now let's look at some of the diversity of birds. So you have, these are actually taxidermically preserved specimens, a lot of them. So they aren't fake models. So you have the heron, you have ospreys, you have hornbills, and you have a lot of other small birds behind, which have been preserved quite nicely. And you have chickens, which Chong Yao finds very cute. Okay, so now let's move to the tropical rainforest. So what do we have in a rainforest? So the first thing to note is that a rainforest is extremely crucial. Just to give you an idea, if I'm not wrong, you know, all of Earth's biomass, about 0.47% is made up by animals. Plants make up 82%, which means we have so much knowledge on animals, but almost most of the Earth is plants. So why is this crucial? So let's look at rainforests. What exactly do they do? So tropical rainforests are disappearing quite fast. So why do we need to save them? Firstly, they house a huge diversity of species of animals, and most of these are actually undiscovered. Second thing is they act as a carbon sink, and they provide us oxygen and water. So a carbon sink is because, you know, you have a lot of CO2 in the air. Now, plants, trees, they take in the CO2, they convert it to glucose and energy, and they release O2. So they store the carbon and they convert it to energy, which is why it's a carbon sink. It removes CO2 from the air. So now let's look at some of the animals. So one of them is flying lizards. So flying lizards, actually, if you look, right, these existed in times of dinosaurs. So flying lizards existed long ago, and they use their skin flaps, which act as an aerofoil. So they fly in similar looping motions. So they can just jump off a tree and they can glide to the next tree, and then they crawl up and then they do the same thing again and again. The second thing is the forest, because a forest is dense, right? You can't have branches 1 meter from the ground. No light's going to get there. So they have mainly dipterocarp trees, which means that all of the branches are high above. What that means is that a lot of animals live in those branches. Look at monkeys and all of them. But that means that some of them glide. It's a very useful mechanism, because you can't keep climbing down, going to the next tree and climbing up another 100 meters. So you have even squirrels that can fly using something called a patagium, and they can glide from tree to tree. Yes, so it takes up a lot less energy than flying because you don't need to power yourself. You just use the air and you just pretty much float. Even snakes can do this, not too far, but snakes can also do this. So they flatten their body and they basically just swim through the air in undulating motions. And they just hope to God that they reach. And some of them are actually very, very good at this. And there's so much diversity, and gliding is so useful that even frogs do this. Can you imagine frogs which have huge legs and are made for jumping? They also have tiny webbing near their feet sometimes, and that allows them to glide a little bit. So now the important thing is interconnectedness in the rainforest, because a rainforest has a huge diversity of species, which means a lot of them interact with each other. So all of these animals impact each other in some way or the other, and the different ecological relationships are actually crucial to study as well. So I'll give you an example. I won't go into detail, but you should read up on figs and wasps. So a lot of these, you have keystone species and a lot of evolutionary relationships and ecological relationships, where if you, let's say, remove one species, the whole ecosystem could crumble. And it's a very delicate balance that's preserved. And the only reason you can have such a balance is because of the rainforest. It allows a lot of different species to exist in different niches. So even scavengers and decomposers have a big impact because a lot of them live in dead tree bark, moist, damp tree bark, and they can act over there. You have a lot of fungi. And so it's just very diverse. And even birds. Birds are very fun to see in rainforests. You should try spotting them if you ever gone after COVID. Once you go overseas, right? You should try spotting in rainforests. Some of these birds, you won't be able to see them, but you can hear them very clearly. Yes, okay. Now we will move on to mammals. So in case there's any confusion, we are mammals. So we are one of the later groups under chordates. So yes. So now firstly, let's look at this fossil. We found a huge fossil. And any guesses on what this is? Someone please guess. I'll give you a prize if you get it right. I'll give you a prize if you get it wrong. Just guess.
Looks like a dinosaur.
Okay. That's a good guess. Yeah, it's not a dinosaur. It's actually
Hongyun guesses it to be a dolphin.
Chongyuan.
Yes.
Chongyuan, you were there. You should know.
So when you were there,
Whale.
It looks like
Yes.
some kind
Who
of
guessed,
eagle.
who guessed whale?
Me.
it's a whale. Even I thought it's a dolphin.
Oh, okay. Yes, actually, it's a whale. So this is actually a sperm whale, if I'm not wrong. Okay, we don't have it there. Yes, it's a sperm whale. So this highlighted bone, right? This bone was actually chipped. So this whale had washed up on the beach and it was severely hurt. It had penetrating trauma. And so that's why it probably couldn't swim and it died. So whales have to go up to the surface. They are mammals, they're not fish. So they can't breathe underwater. So they need to go up to the surface and breathe and then go back down, which means if they can't swim, then that sucks. So it actually had washed up on the shore and this fossil was found. And then they kind of pieced it together and they put it back. So one of the things you can see is also a key facet of evolution. So can you see my pointer, by the way? Not sure if you can.
Yep,
But-
can.
Okay, you see this thing over here? This is actually not required. So whales and a lot of these species actually have their remnants. I forgot what this is called.
It's called a reduced limb.
Yes, it's a reduced limb. I forgot what limb it is. But basically, they don't walk anymore, so they don't need it. But it still exists because evolution doesn't kick out stuff very easily or very quickly. So now it's vestigial. Just like our post-anal tails, which go away, this is also vestigial, except it doesn't go away. It just stays in the whale. But okay, now we'll move on to other mammals. So over here, we have many different skeletons. So you have a skull of a koala, you have skull of a platypus, and one group of mammals, which is called monotremes. So they lay eggs. But this is a kangaroo. It's got a very, very interesting posture. They've got very, very strong muscles attached to the femur and attached to the tibia and fibula. So this part, their legs are very strong. They can jump very high and they can kick very, very hard. So next is placentals. So placentals are animals that will give birth to live young basically, and they develop with something called a placenta, which nourishes the young. So you have humpback whales, you have orangutans, you have dugongs, leopards, and pigs. So actually, I just realized the orangutan skull looks very weird. But yes, so now you look at an elephant skull. So it's actually very different, you know. You look at an animal, you look at their head, and then you try and you can't, it's not easy to match the skull to them because they have a lot of muscle and a lot of other features that change the way their head looks. This is the structure of an elephant. They have quite a big brain. On each side, you can see these are where the tusks would anchor. And their jaw is interesting. They don't have many teeth. So they have like kind of a flap and two major jaws, and they can just close stuff. So they also, rather than move their mouth and put their mouth to stuff like many animals, just like we use hands, they use their trunk a lot. Yes, so now we have whales and we have dugongs. So dugongs they're like manatees. It's like a sea cow. So they're quite fat, round, cylindrical, and they just move around like giant seals in the water. Yes. Now we look at evolution of humans. So these are skulls that belong to ancestral humans. So they're not Homo sapiens. So you have a lot of different species. So you have one of the earlier ones, you have Australopithecus, and then it becomes Homo erectus, and you have a lot of others, Homo neanderthalensis, floresiensis. And finally, most recently is Homo sapiens. So actually, a lot of them over time, we lost our fitness a little. We aren't exactly the epitome of fitness now, but Neanderthals, so, you know, early humans, it was hypothesized by distance on the beach, distance of their footprints, that their average running speed was maybe Usain Bolt's speed because they had to run. And nowadays we sit on the sofa a lot. So we don't need it. But basically their morphology has changed a lot. And as we learn to use tools and grow the different ways, we managed to use fire, we managed to use tools to hunt, herd mentality, where they were able to kill mammoths and all of that. And as they evolved, the need for certain physical traits reduced and the need for other traits increased, which is why we have relatively big brains and our fitness dropped. But yes, that is essentially the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, guys. Okay, don't leave yet. Before we leave, Oman has some things to say.
So thanks for the amazing presentations. Yeah, before I leave, can everyone on their cams to take a photo?
Unga, you have to stop sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, just on your cams. No need shy.
There are a lot of year 5 bio people.
Trivia, are you taking the photos or a screenshot?
I need your help, please.
Okay,
'cause
no
my
problem.
print screen button is gone.
Okay, I'll take 3, 2, 1. And the other side. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Now we'll be having Q&A. So any questions, you can send it to the chat or just unmute and ask.
Any questions, guys?
So Yo Tiacheng in the chat asked, is there good resource showing the whole tree of life?
Omkar, you want to answer that?
Yes, so okay. The whole tree of life is very, 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 it's a very it's complex, meaning it's very detailed. But yes, you can look for a Linnaean classification tree. So right now we use the Linnaeus classification. You can look at textbooks or search online. It depends how detailed. So very few can actually show all of the diversity. But if you look at this, this is pretty much as broad as it gets. So, but if you want, you can just start off with the Linnaean classification and then go. So it will divide, right? It starts from eukarya, archaea, bacteria, and then you can go and zoom in further. So you can look Linnaeus and then choose a specific part and go further.
Interesting.
Yeah, alternatively, if you want to learn more about the tree of life, you can go directly to Lee Kuan Yew Museum when the restrictions are lifted so that you can take a look at the animals in more detail and be fascinated by the museum.
Did they pay you to say this?
No.
All right. Next question by Cursin. Why do frogs need to glide? Do they go up to the tree?
Okay, so not okay. Generally, they don't go up till the top of trees, but some of them do glide because they live close to swamps or close to moist environments. But some of them do go up because they want to catch insects. So some of them can actually climb on plants, and they have a tongue, right? So their tongue can actually be shot out. And what they do is their tongue is thin, it's muscular, and it's sticky. So they go and they shoot it out, they catch insects, and they take it back. But it's not always easy to do this near the water. So sometimes you need to go up and climb up on plants and different vegetation. And it's easier to get around if they are able to fly. That being said, some of them can fly, but the major adaptation of webbed feet is for swimming. So flying isn't one of the main things. It's just that a few of them can.
Yeah, there are some frogs that like specialize in land living though, like that tree frogs, and they'll have an evolutionary pressure to glide. So like, I think some of the poison dart frogs are tree frogs, so they'll have like a better flight adaptations, I guess, to live in the forest.
That's really cool. Okay, then Chunjat asks, what do I do if I'm attacked by 20 cone snails?
Oh, well, you can just kind of die.
Just die.
Yeah, also, but one interesting thing about the cone snail is that even though it is very venomous, I mean very, very like it is very toxic. However, actually, many of these these chemicals are actually extracted from the cone snails, and many of them have actually been shown to have potential like medicinal use. So you can actually go search on it. Actually, cone snails is quite an interesting and active area of research for scientists.
So you can collect the 20 cone snails and sell them.
Yo, that's cool.
Cone snail shells are very expensive.
Okay, so collect them and sell them if you're
Yes.
Or donate them to a museum, that's a nice thing to do as well.
One of our IVO professors, right? She had a ton of snail collections. Like she got it from this very old man who donated it all to her free of charge.
Wow.
It was pretty cool.
Next question. May I know what this year's Bio-O is? Sorry, I can't. May I know what year's Bio-O this is covered?
It isn't covered in bio. It's covered in bio bonds.
It's year 5.
Year 5 sem 1.
Bio.
Yeah.
Next.
Not all of this though. So you won't go into mammals. You'll rarely ever learn
Yeah, they don't cover
placentas
mammals.
Yeah,
and
and also
dinosaurs.
if you take year 5 bio O, actually in year 5 I think Miss Renata will like, if the COVID restrictions are in place, she will actually like she will invite some external vendors to actually give you some
launching.
give you some workshop on the plants and animals. So actually during our year, actually there wasn't really COVID yet. I mean the restrictions was not really like very tight yet. So we actually had a chance to the external vendor who's Miss Wang, she actually came to school and then she gave us like real life specimens and then like a legit like session for like a few hours on like plants and animals, which is the previous one that we shared on. So hopefully, I'm not sure about this year, but hopefully for the future years, so there'll be this experience for the Bio Olympiad kids. But yeah, this is for year 5 and usually right before SBO. Yeah, when you're
Okay. Next, Alicia asks, why did the sauropod develop such a long neck if it couldn't lift it up?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So I will use an analogy. You know, a vacuum cleaner. The way you vacuum is you go left, left, right. You keep sucking.
I'm just shitting up the brain right now.
Sauropods were so big, that's exactly what they did. So their long neck would allow them to stand in one place and they literally swing their head left to right. So they would just
I can't find
chop up all the vegetation and suck it all up. So it allowed them to
Got
just go from
phylum lah,
left to right.
Chong.
So if they had a small neck, you realize they would have to move everywhere to reach vegetation. So you have to walk here, eat the grass, walk here, eat the grass, and keep on doing that. Long neck allowed them to sweep across fields. And so in one place, they could just sweep and eat a lot of vegetation. So that's it. That's how they use their long neck generally.
Mm.
So initially they thought it would go up, but now the theory is that they sweep left to right.
Then how do they drink water? Do they open their legs like giraffe and then drink water?
No, they are quite giraffe because they are meant to, their necks are meant to go up, right? So in order to bring it all the way down, they need to do a split. Essentially, for sauropods, their necks are longer and they're mostly horizontal, so they can very easily reach down.
So they can't split.
No,
Oh,
too
okay.
much. It's not easy to split. I guess they could, but they generally don't. If need be, they can kneel down a bit, I
Mm,
think.
it'll be
But
cool.
generally, their necks can reach. There's no problem because it's not very tall. It's just long.
I see. Shinikat asked, is there any reason why a underwater species decides to evolve into a land species?
For underwater species, right? There must be an evolutionary pressure for them to go into the land species. So, like one possible hypothesis is that okay, this underwater species, right, was in an area, was like in a very swampy area where seasonally the water level go up and down. So like the lake kind of dries every year. So that was the main hypothesis which served as the evolutionary pressure for that kind of pushed the animals to evolve into like that evolved land adaptation. So they didn't consciously do this, obviously. Some of them had mutations that enable them to better survive on in the less watery environments. So those kind of propagated over the generations. Yeah.
So for the seasonal one, they have hybrid, is it, or do they just to lean towards like land animal traits and then lean back towards sea animal traits like that?
Oh, for the amphibians, is it? So I think from the fish they would have evolved into like fully land, and then the amphibians would have stayed. So then there would be two groups. So one would be the reptiles, which kind of moved away from water entirely. So they got like the scaly membranes and everything, whereas the amphibians kind of stayed near water. So they evolved like the wet skin, so they could still breathe inside the water.
Step by step. So some of them have something called buccal pumping, where they can just force air in. So slowly and slowly they evolved. You remember do you want me to share? I remember there were a few problems when you go to land. So as soon as frogs have something called a Eurostyle, where their backbone and their legs are connected to make it fused and extra strong, which is why they were able to counter the buoyancy. But they still hadn't managed to counter the respiration fully, but enough such that they could be water dependent, but they could still live on land. And slowly they evolved to counter all of the problems and went more and more to land.
Yo, frogs are damn cool. Shruti asked, hi. For the sauropods, why did they evolve a really long neck since they fed on low-lying vegetation?
I think that's the same question, right?
I think Shruti, do you want to
It's
clarify?
the same question. I just didn't see the question.
I see.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Next, Parvati asks, is there a specific phylum of mushrooms where edible mushrooms are located, or are they just scattered across different phylums?
They're actually scattered. So I was reading this article yesterday when I was preparing for the slide. So apparently, right, there is no real morphological trait that differentiates edible versus not edible mushrooms. Like the whole toadstool thing, like the one with red and white dots, that's a total scam. Like there are some edible toadstools. So it's just, you have to really try and test every single mushroom. So that is one area of research, like find new mushrooms that are edible. So it's kind of very randomly scattered. Yeah.
I see. Cousin asked, why dictylic need turning neck while fish don't need?
Okay,
Like the neck The neck.
Actually, more than a turning neck, right? The key advantage was a liftable, movable neck. So the thing is, fish don't need to look out of water. Can you imagine if, as a tiktaalik, you put your head out of water and some animal bites it off? So when you go to water, so the idea is you want to be able to see before you go. So if you're in the water like this, you want to be able to stick your neck out and look around. So that's why you have eyes on top of the head, and your neck can move such that you don't have to move your whole body. Like a fish, their eyes are on the side, so they want to see, they have to actually move. But the tiktaalik, for safety, it was able to detach its neck and look on land and look around, which made it key.
So they are like crocodiles, is it?
Kind of. Actually, most land animals on land can do that. So it's only marine animals like fish that can't, because they just have eyes on the side. They don't have a neck.
I see. Nazira asked, does the LKCNHM Natural History Museum also feature pics of microbial specimens and discuss about their diversity? Smiley face.
Okay, I'll answer that. So for LKCNHM Museum, not really. So they're basically, for the LKCNHM Museum, they are more of focusing. Remember just now there were 3 domains of life. There's bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. So for the LKCNHM Museum, is mostly focusing on the eukaryotes, which is mostly what we see lah. And the bacteria and archaea is like usually very small. We don't usually see them. So it didn't really focus on that. But if you want to take a look at they do feature some microbes, like, but in the form of videos. So actually at the museum, there are actually also like many projectors around, and then they show you very cool videos. So some of them, for example, they include like showing like an amoeba. Okay, amoeba eukaryotes, but yeah, they show like microbes, how they function, how they work, but it's a very small portion of the museum. If you want to see microbial diversity, I think you can go to year 6 biology and they will teach you more about it. Yeah.
Okay. Vanity asked, are there any interesting examples of very small dinosaurs and their adaptations? I think almost everything that was covered was quite large, right? Like small dinosaurs.
Okay, this is very interesting. So yes, and okay, the first thing that's crucial to note is dinosaurs were the biggest. They were the dominant species, which means you had a huge diversity. So you had the standard small-looking theropod dinosaur, you know, the classic look. You had a small one was Compsognathus. So you can look, it's just classic. But yes, so Archaeopteryx was tiny, Compsognathus was tiny. You have different types. You remember I said gliding dinosaurs? So there was a small dinosaur about maybe this big or a little bigger. Not much bigger. So it's Microraptor. What it did was it climbed up on trees, fed on small lizards, and it could glide. So you have those kind of gliding dinosaurs. Actually, a very interesting one was, you remember the sauropods, the huge dinosaurs I had mentioned? So there was one island that was completely separated, which means there was no interconnectedness, no gene flow, nothing. And you had the exact same dinosaurs that were about this big. They were tiny. They had no predators over there, which means nothing would kill them. So they just evolved and they were tiny and they didn't need size. So the same size. So search up Megarosaurus and a couple of others. So Titanosaurs and all, they were tiny in the sense that birds could come and feed on them. They were just babies. They look like that. So yes, when you have reproductive isolation and no gene flow, you had a lot of different species, and then so you have many types. The last important types are the herd dinosaurs. Like many of the meat eaters were alone, right? They worked alone. They were huge hunters. Some of them worked in packs. So Velociraptor worked in packs. Another one was Trudon. Trudon was one of the smartest for the dinosaurs. They had huge eyes, allowing them to see at night. And what they would do is, in the middle of the night, they would run in packs and they would target one dinosaur. So all of them were fast. They would run through big herds and they would kind of interweave to scare the dinosaurs. So all of them would move. Some baby of the herd, herbivore, would be scared and wander off. And when it wandered off, it was dead. The Trudons would come around it. So they used their intelligence and herding ability. They were smaller than us. So there's one Trudon that was big, but many of them are smaller than us. They're fast and they're smart and they saw very well. So it's very diverse, but yeah.
Small dinosaurs sound pretty cute. Then Parvati asked, relating to the mushroom question, right? Like, how do they test whether the mushroom is poisonous? Like, she's guessing that they don't get people to eat and see if they die?
I just Googled this actually. So basically there are two tests. So first to identify, they'll use chemical tests. So basically the toxins are chemicals, right? So there are some very simple tests. So there's something called Mexzel's reagent, and then it will test for like specific functional groups found in the toxins. Then you can also, I don't know, that's like the website said they've also like ammonia tests and KOH tests. So I guess that they would identify specific chemical groups that are only found in the toxic mushroom. Then like some other methods is that scientists used to feed mushrooms to mice. So mice are like pretty related to humans. So similar effects there. And then I think very, very long ago, like in 1500s, they used to feed it to prisoners to test it. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, they don't get people to eat it and see if they die. Then Ash asked if you, any of you would rather fight an Euplocephalus or a Carcharodontosaurus. Yeah, I don't know how to read.
Euplocephalus or Carcharodontosaurus? Euplocephalus. Because Euplocephalus would compete with me for eating vegetables, but Carcharodontosaurus would eat me.
So yes.
Yeah. Also, I made a mistake earlier. The largest one, Argentinosaurus, is not 180. It's 180,000 pounds. In kilograms, though, it ranges from 90 to 110 generally, 80 to 110.
So Vanati was correct.
Yes, Vanadi, you are right.
Hey, I was also correct.
By the way, 77 is not the biggest. 77 is the smaller range of Argentinosaurus. It goes up to 110. Google better.
kgs. You're talking about kgs, right?
Yes, 110,000 kgs. Yes.
110,000.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Are there any other questions? Like anyone want to unmute and ask? Or do the presenters have anything they want to share?
I'm surprised by the number of questions. Thanks for asking so many, guys.
Yeah.
Good question.
Also, if you guys are very interested in dinosaurs, I'll recommend a couple of books and a documentary. There's one from BBC, which is very, very, very good.
Do you have the name?
Yes, I think it's Planet Dinosaur.
I'll just send it to the chat later.
Yeah, you can send it to
BBC Planet Dinosaur, yeah.
Yeah, Scoman, send the photos to the chat also later.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Is there anything else?
That's all.
That's all. Okay.
Thanks, guys, for coming.
So yeah, I hope you all have fun and learned stuff about animals, dinosaurs, and plants too. So yes, thanks for coming and have a great weekend ahead. I hope you all enjoy. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.